Okay, welcome everyone. Don Hazelwood here. Want to thank you for coming out to our webinar today on rubrics. I just wanted to take a minute and thank those by our booth at the NC3ADL and said hello. It was really good to see everybody, and thank you very much for coming to our presentations at the NC3ADL. If you have any further questions about anything that you saw at the conference, please feel free to drop me an email or give me a call. I would love to follow up with you. But anyways, again, it was really good to see everyone. So I am going to now just turn this over to Shelley and get started with the webinar.
Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is doing all right today. Just in case we have some people who may be new to this format or haven't been to a go-to webinar before, we actually don't have the chat function enabled because it kind of becomes a free-for-all with this many people. So if you have a question or a comment or need anything, please put it in the question area. That'll be sent straight to the organizers, and we'll be answering those, some of them as we are going through the presentation, so feel free to enter those questions at any time, and then we'll definitely have some time at the end for Q&A. So if we don't answer your question right away, don't think we've lost it. It's going to keep those in the queue for us, and we'll run through all of those before we're done. Okay, just want to make sure. And just very quickly, could everybody kind of give me just a heads up in the questions area? Is everyone seeing our Learning Spaces screen, and can everyone hear me all right? All right. Lots of yeses, so we're going to go ahead and get started. This is going to be recorded. You should get a follow-up email that has a link to the recording, so if you missed something, you can always go back and look at it tomorrow. So welcome again. This is our, I don't even know how many we've done of these, third, fourth? I think it's my third, maybe y'all's fourth or fifth, because I've missed y'all the last couple of months. You've had some other speakers come and talk to you, but I'm back. So today we're going to be talking about some advanced grading options. We're going to specifically on using the built-in rubrics and marking guides in Moodle. And we're also going to take just a little bit of time to talk about using scales to grade activities in your Moodle course, because those are kind of like, in my opinion, a mini rubric, right? You can kind of set your criteria for how you want to award it and just give them a quick kind of feedback using a scale option. So I wanted to throw that in there as well. And then if we have time, I actually have in this presentation just a tiny bit of info, pass-fail, because I know that's a question I get asked quite frequently, especially at the higher ed level. I know that's something that tends to happen in many higher ed classes. So we'll throw that in at the end. That's a bonus for you. But we're mainly on rubrics and for those of you who I haven't met before, my name is Shelley McCollum, and I'm an instructional specialist with Remote Learner and a member of our Learning Spaces team. So if you have any questions, feel free to send them to Remote Learner my way, and I'm happy to answer them about this or any of the other topics that we've covered. And you can also find me in our Learning Spaces site, so if you have a subscription, you can always get to me through there as well. We're going to kind of back up the truck before we jump straight into the rubrics. I want to make sure we have just some general information about grading understood. I want to make sure everybody's coming at this from the same place. So when you're talking about grading activities within a Moodle course, you have three possible ways of grading, okay? And I say three, but Moodle kind of thinks of it as two, but I think of it as three. So I'm going to explain it that way to you. So two of these ways are defined in the gradebook itself, and they are both considered what Moodle calls simple direct grading. And what that means is you as an instructor look at the work that was submitted, and then you make a decision and you assign a grade to that work. That's simple direct grading. Okay? But you have two methods of simple direct grading, and they're really very different in a lot of ways. So I count those as two separate ways of grading. So most commonly, most teachers, most of the time, will use a points method of grading. Most frequently, it's that something is worth 100 points, and then a teacher assigns a grade out of those 100 possible points. Okay, that is available on any activity in Moodle, and some of those activities Moodle can actually grade on a point system automatically for you, like a quiz activity or a lesson activity. You tell it what the maximum point value is, and Moodle figures out what they got right and what they got wrong, and it determines the number of points that they receive. Now, the other simple direct grading option is what is called a scale. And we're going to take some time to look at a scale. It is still simple and direct because the instructor is still looking at the work that was submitted, and they are still making a judgment call, and they are assigning that grade. But the scale is going to give feedback when that grade is assigned, because the scale itself is a form of feedback. It's going to be a word or a phrase that is going to give the student some type of indication as to how well they mastered that activity, or what level of achievement you think they reached in that activity. So to me, that's a very different kind of method than the point system. Points people tend to think of as percentages, and while yes, you could have passed or failed, I think you have an ability to give a lot more feedback very quickly using a scale. Okay, so we're going to talk about those. Now, the other way of grading is what is known as advanced grading, and this is something that is only available currently in the assignment module in Moodle. Okay, so you can't do advanced grading on a lesson, you can't do advanced grading on a forum, you can't do advanced grading on a quiz. You can only do it on an assignment module where they actually are either an online text or they have uploaded a file to you. And you have two options for that advanced grading, and they are very, very similar. They function. So you just kind of have to choose which one you are more comfortable with. So you have a marking guide and you have a rubric, and we're going to look at both of those in a lot of detail. We're going to create them. We're going to look at how we can make templates and the differences between the two. So you should have hopefully a very good grasp on those two before you leave today. So that simple direct grading, okay, is the default form of grading for all graded activities in Moodle. It defaults to simple direct grading. If you use an assignment module, you can change it then to one of the advanced grading techniques, either the rubric or the marking guide. Okay. Now, the options for what form of simple direct grading, whether you can do point or scale, are going to vary depending on the type of activity. So I've already kind of mentioned this, but you kind of think about it this way. Any activity in Moodle that's going to allow you to rate a student's submission. So you can do ratings on forums and you can do ratings on glossaries. Anything that has a rating is going to let you rate either based on a point or based on a scale. Okay, so you can use either for those. For the graded activities, if you do a lesson or an assignment, you can grade using a point system or using a scale system. Now, if you use a scale system to grade a lesson, you're going to have to manually grade it. Okay, so you could use that if you were going to do like a lesson with an essay at the end, you could grade using a scale. All right, but quizzes will not allow you to grade using a scale. Quizzes only allow you to grade using points because your quizzes are usually something that Moodle is going to grade automatically, and it has to know how many points each question is worth and how many points total the quiz is worth, and Moodle's not smart enough to do the scale grading on that. So, either an answer is right or wrong. There is no scale on a quiz, especially when you're talking about multiple choice questions. Now, essays get tricky, but because quizzes are a variety of those question types, you're not going to be able to use a scale system for that. So if you're doing quizzes, you have to do points. You don't have any other options. Most of the other stuff, you could substitute instead of points, a scale. And if you're doing an assignment, you can substitute in either a rubric or a marking guide. Okay? So let's start off with scales because those are really simple to use, but it's a nice way to be able to give just a little bit of feedback while you're actually assigning a grade to something. So a scale is a series of words, or it could be a single word, that is used to actually like rate an assignment or a post. So think about, well, the easiest scale would be a pass-fail scale. Either you passed or failed, and that is giving immediate feedback to people. But you can have scales that have varying degrees of achievement internally. So you could have a 6-option scale, and you could have 6 different levels of achievement in your scale. And then you would look at a student's submission, choose what level you think they achieved, and you would choose that option in the scale to grade their assignment. Now, what's nice is the scales up here as a drop-down menu in the grading screen, so it's very quick to grade. It's a lot quicker than using a rubric or a marking guide because you're not having to look at a number of criteria. You're still grading holistically, right? So there's still a lot of subjectivity when you think about it, more so than you would see using a rubric or a marking guide, okay? Now, scales can be custom designed within a course, or you can actually have scales that are considered what we call standard scales that are available for teachers to use throughout the entire site. And a site administrator either can create those or can take a scale that a teacher has created and can mark it as a standard scale so that it can be used by other teachers throughout the site. Creating a scale is very simple. It is done within your course gradebook, and there is actually a Scales tab in your gradebook. Okay, and we're going to take a look at that in just a second. We'll set one up. But before we go there, I just kind of want to run through just the nuts and bolts of creating one. So when you create a scale, you actually have to type out the words or phrases you want to have used in the scale. And when you do that, when you're making it, you want to start with the most negative and list them separated by commas and end with the most positive. So from left to right, it goes negative, less negative, usually fairly neutral, positive, most positive kind of thing, okay? And what Moodle does with a scale that's interesting is that it will actually convert the scale to a percentage grade in your gradebook. So if you want to grade something with a scale and you still want that grade to be factored in to the student's overall course grade, then you just have to make sure that you have Moodle accepting it as a grade. Like it's not counted as a no grade, it's put into a category where you want it. And what will happen is Moodle will convert that scale. So the most negative option is going to receive a grade of 0. And the most positive option is going to receive a grade of 100%. Now, if you are grading something that's using like a point system, the most negative option will receive 0 points, and the most positive option will receive the highest number of points that are available. So, for example, in my scale down here on the bottom, this is 4 steps. So unacceptable would receive 0, and outstanding would receive 4. So it would get 4 out of 4. Okay, so you would have 0 out of 4. Oh, wait, no, sorry, I said that wrong. That's what most people think. It's going to convert it to a percentage. It's going to convert it to a percentage. Okay, so see, I did the thing everybody always does. What happens that I see the most often in scales is that people will say, okay, I have 4 options in my scale, so they should all be worth 25 points, and that's not how Moodle works. Okay, because if it was all worth 25 points, unacceptable would be worth 25 points. Okay, so, and actually what I did say was correct. This would be, you have to think the bottom is always a 0, the top is always the highest. But if this is 0, then it's 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay? So unacceptable would always give someone a score of a 0. Unsatisfactory is 1 step higher, so it's a third higher, so it would give them a score of a 33. Satisfactory is another third higher. It would give them a score of a 66, and outstanding would give them a score of a 100. So what I see most frequently happening when people set up scales is that they set up a scale, it's got 4 options in it, they think each option is going to be worth 25 points, and then when the students' grades come in, their grades are lower than they had expected. And they're trying to figure out why they're so much lower. And it's because Moodle isn't looking at the number of options in the scale, it's looking at the number of steps to determine how much is worth when it starts to convert it. Okay? So you have 0, 33, 66, 100. If Satisfactory is not supposed to be a 66, then I always tell people put something else in your scale. Typically for the 0, I tell people to start off with no submission. If they didn't submit anything, then they get a 0. And then that would give us 5 options, but 4 steps. So unacceptable would be a 25. Unsatisfactory would be a 50. Satisfactory would then be a 75, which is a passing score in most instances. And then outstanding would be a 100. Okay? So something to keep in mind when you're building a scale. It's not the number of options, it's the number of steps that's going to determine how much each step is worth. So let's look at what it looks like to actually create a scale. Very, very simple. You go into your gradebook. You click on the Scales tab. If you don't have tabs navigation in your gradebook, just look in the drop-down menu. There will be an option for scale. When you're in a scale, in the scale screen, you have an option to add a new scale, but you will also see scales that are standard scales. These are available throughout the entire site. And then you'll see a list of custom scales that you have created within this individual course. Okay? So if you click Add a New Scale, it's going to open up a screen. And really, all you have to do, and please ignore my message, sorry, we just upgraded some stuff on this course and I didn't notice that, so I'll look at that later. All you have to do is give your scale a name, and then you actually type your scale out. So this is my example scale, okay? I'm going to type the phrases that I want to have appear. Now, these are not going to be politically correct necessarily. And I used to be an English teacher, so I always think of proofreading and things like that. Okay, and you can include punctuation if you want, so you can do the exclamation points if you're really happy with their grade, whatever. All right, so that's all that you have to put to actually create a new scale. Now, because I'm a site administrator on this site, I actually get an extra option, standard scale. And all I have to do is check that box, and then this scale will be available for all users on my site. If I'm not a site administrator, I won't be able to check that box. In fact, I don't even know if that option shows up if you're not a site administrator, whether you see it or not. But if it does show up, you can't click it. So then what happens is if, as a teacher, you have created a scale and you think this scale might be really useful for people in my department or for people across the entire site, you want to make sure you give it a more descriptive name so everyone will know kind of what it is. You might want to supply a description for it so other people will have a good idea of what kind of scale they're choosing, right? And you create the scale, and before you use it in any activity in your course, you let your site administrator know. They go into your course, they go into your gradebook, they go into your scales, they come into this scale to edit it, and they will check the box standard scale. And then they will save it. And it will make your scale that you created a standard that everyone can use. Okay? If you have already used a scale in your course, your site administrator will not be able to come in and check it as a standard scale. So the minute it's attached to any activities in your course, it cannot be turned into a standard scale. Okay? So I'm going to save my changes, and you'll see that my new scale appears in my list of custom scales. It tells me that it has not been used yet, and I still have the ability to edit it. Okay? Now, so that's how I create the scale. To actually use the scale to grade, I have to go in and assign the scale to an activity that I want to use it to grade. Now, I can do that for activities that already exist in my course, or I can do that when I actually create the activity. If I'm creating an assignment or changing an assignment in the grade section of the assignment settings, I see an option for type. It defaults to point. All I have to do is change it to scale, and then I will get a drop-down menu that becomes active, and I can choose which scales that are available to me I would like to use to grade that assignment. If I'm in an activity that does not do grades but does ratings, like a forum or a glossary, then I have to go to the rating section, and it actually says scale, and I would have to change it, the type, from point to scale. And again, it would then activate this drop-down menu so that I could select which scale I wanted to use to do ratings for that forum. So these options are in the settings for an individual activity. So I have an example on here of an assignment that actually we have added a scale to for our grading. So as a teacher, I go into View, My Assignment, and you can see, let's go down here where they're all working, that I have quick grading turned on. So in this screen, I could go ahead and I can just use the drop-down menu to grade the assignment using quick grading. Or I can go into the actual grading screen. I can see their entire submission, can read it, and then I would just, under grade, click on the scale and choose to award holistically how I think they did on the entire assignment. Now, just because I grade a scale, it doesn't change anything else. If I want to use outcomes and I have outcomes assigned, I can still use outcomes for that as well. If I want to add feedback comments, and we are going to do more on outcomes after the 3.0 release, so that's in the spring. So we'll talk a lot about outcomes in the spring. If I want to add feedback comments, I can. If I want to upload feedback files, I can. Nothing else changes. It's just instead of typing in a number, I use a scale. So depending on how detailed I make the phrasing in my scale, and you have the ability, you can type an entire sentence. There, I don't know of a limit. You probably can't type a paragraph, but you could put an entire sentence that would be kind of descriptive. You could really give them some feedback as to, well, you're getting this grade because it's kind of this level of achievement, right? This is a very simplified scale, but you could get more detailed. So that's why I go ahead and throw this in when we're talking about rubrics, because it kind of is like a rubric. It's calculating a grade for you, even though you're not assigning actual points. You're grading based on achievement, okay? So you can put whatever you want in there and then save, and it's going to have that grade assigned to it. So now when you go into the grade book, you do have a couple of options for how the scale displays in the gradebook. So you can decide to have, if you look at my screenshot, the actual scale display in the gradebook. So it will tell them, okay, on the scale, this is where you landed. But you can also decide whether or not you want the, and that will display if you use the real method under display for the item. But you can also go into the gradebook and you can go into your categories and items and go into the settings for the individual activity, and you can change the grade display type. So I could change it and have it only display the percentage in the gradebook. So I grade based on a scale. If they go into the assignment, they would see my scale grade, but if they go in the gradebook, it would show them the percentage. Or I could have real and in parentheses percentage. This is a really popular option because it would show them what they were given on the scale and then in parentheses what that converts to in terms of a percentage grade. Okay, so if you want to change how the scale score is displayed, you go into your setup in your gradebook on your categories and items page, and then you would go into your assignment. I'm going to edit my settings, and you have to hit show more to get that to come up. And it's going to be down here, grade display type, and you can change it. So I could change it to real and percentage. Real is however it was graded, so the scale, and then the percentage will be in parentheses after it, and I can save the changes. Now when I do that and I go into, here you go, this is what it looks like. Get that kind of centered for you. So this is what the students would see. They got their scale score and then what that converts to. Okay? Questions about scales before we move into the more advanced gradings for actual assignments. The nice thing about scales, you can't do rubrics on any of the other activities, but you could do scales on almost all of the activities. So I always like to kind of throw that in there as an option. Okay. So now let's look at your advanced grading options for the assignment module. So again, this is only in the assignment module. And you actually configure your advanced grading options within each individual assignment. So when you go into an assignment, in your administration block, you have all the options for the administration of that actual assignment activity. And that's where you would choose advanced grading. That's where you're going to be able to set things up. When you get into the advanced grading screen, you're going to get to choose whether you want to use a marking guide or a rubric, and that's where you actually can either create a new form or you can use an existing template. And you can have those templates published for this site as a whole, or you can use a rubric that you as a user have created elsewhere and pull that in to use that in this other assignment. Okay, so you can create a rubric for one assignment, and then you as a teacher can then use that as a template for future assignments that you create. If you want it to be a site-wide template, then a site administrator has to log in, go into your course, go into that assignment, go into that rubric for that assignment, and publish it as a template. Okay? So let's look at the difference between the two, and then we'll actually take a look at how to set them up. Because a lot of people use these two terms interchangeably. I know in education it's, okay, well, what's a marking guide compared to a rubric? Well, a lot of people think they're the same thing, that they're synonymous. And in a lot of ways they are. But in Moodle, they have some very different features. So both of these are going to be what we call criteria-based grading. You as a teacher get to define the criteria and that you are going to be using to assess whatever work is submitted in the assignment. Now they're a little different in how the points are actually awarded. So in a marking guide, you define a criteria and you assign a maximum point value per criterion. Okay? And then you as a teacher come in and a little more subjectively, I think, get to decide how many points out of that maximum you are awarding. So the criteria just lists the maximum point, and then you, as the instructor, get to decide how many points they have earned for that criteria. Okay? The rubric, on the other hand, you're going to take that criterion, and for each criterion, you're going to break it down into levels of achievement, and you will have predefined points that will be awarded for each level of achievement for each criterion. So then when you go to grade, it's a little more objective because it's, okay, did they reach this level of achievement? Then they get this number of points. Okay, so it's more like the table grading form that you may have seen people use in the past, or you may have used yourself in the past. So it would be more kind of like a table, whereas a marking guide is typically a list. And it says grammar is worth 25 points, and proper MLA citations are worth another 25 points, that kind of thing. But the teacher gets to decide how many points out of 25 did you earn, and that is somewhat subjective. Whereas the rubric says grammar is worth 25 points. If you have no grammar errors, you get the full 25 points. If you have a few spelling errors, you get 15 points. If you really need to go and take a grammar course, you get 5 points, right? So it's broken down into those levels of achievement. Rubrics are kind of nice because since it's all broken down, you're really just clicking to score. You just click on the box that best represents their level of accomplishment, and then the calculation is all done in the back for you. Okay? And in the rubric, you do have the ability to then give feedback for each specific criterion. So you can go in and you can say, oh, grammar, well, I need to write some notes specifically about grammar and why I awarded them that level of achievement for grammar. And so you can type notes, and they're linked directly to that specific criterion. Same thing in the marking guide. You can still do feedback per criteria, but the other thing about the marking guide that I like is, you know, I taught English. I taught high school English for 9 years, and I can tell you that a lot of times you would find yourself writing the same comment over and over and over again when you would be grading someone's essay. So there were times when you really wished you just had a rubber stamp, right? Well, you can kind of do that with a marking guide. You can do criteria. I call it quick feedback, but it's basically common feedback that you have to give over and over again. Well, you can type that out ahead of time, the most common comments that you give. And then when you're working through your marking guide form, you just click on them and you don't have to retype them, and it just basically pastes them in. So it makes it a little bit easier to give feedback. So the biggest issue, though, I think, is this difference about how it's assigning the points. They're very similar otherwise, but the marking guide's a little more subjective. You can decide on whatever point value you want to give for each criteria as long as it doesn't exceed the maximum that you allotted, whereas the rubric, you're going to click on the level of achievement and it's going to award them the points that have been assigned to that level. Okay? So let's go and look at how these are created and how you use them to grade. What does it actually look like? I'm going to go back to my course. I'm going to go into an assignment, and let's start with, we're going to start with the marking guide. They're usually a little faster to create, so if you're in a hurry, marking guide is a really quick way to create one as well. Not as quick as a scale, but still pretty good. So here I am, I'm in an assignment. This is what my students would see. That's their instructions. Since I'm in the assignment, if I go over to the assignment administration, in the administration block, I see the option for advanced grading. So I'm going to click on advanced grading, and it's going to take me into this screen. Now, if I had just created this assignment, it would say simple direct grading here. Okay? And I would just choose marking guide. Now, once I'm in there and I have chosen marking guide, it's going to give me a couple of options. I can either, I already have a form that I created for this one, so typically what it would say is create a new form, but since I already created one earlier, in the interest of time, it's asking me if I want to edit it, okay, or I can delete it. Typically when you're doing this and it's brand new, it would say create a new marking guide or choose from a template, if there are any templates available to you. All right, now since I'm a site administrator and I had already created this marking guide, I have the option to publish it as a template. Now, unlike scales, a marking guide and a rubric could be published as a template even if they've already been used in an assignment. So if you've created one and it's working really well for you in your course, then you could let your site administrator know and they could publish it and it would be available for everyone. All right, so I'm going to go into edit because the edit screen is the same as creating a new screen and it'll show you exactly what you need. So just like with the scale, the first thing you have to do is name your marking guide, and you have the option to provide a description, which is great if, especially, you are going to be publishing this as a template because that gives everyone kind of an idea of what the motivation was, what kind of assignments they might use this for, that kind of information. If you're just using it for you, you may not need it. When you get into the marking guide portion of the setup, you have, I add a criterion so you can see what it looks like when there's nothing in there. It has a criterion on the screen and you literally click where it says to click. You click to edit the criterion name, and then you have the option to provide a description for students that they would see when they're viewing the marking guide that explains what that criterion is. You also have an option to provide a description for markers. So if you have a TA that's helping you grade, you could actually put information in there to kind of help them judge how to award points. And then you have the maximum mark possible. Okay, so you can see I have a couple up here I've already done. The criterion name was grammar. I gave the description for the students, the ability to use the English language. Again, these are not all politically correct. And then the description for the markers was telling them to focus on subject, verb, agreement, and punctuation. And the maximum mark for that is 25 points. Okay. Then I had original thought because I don't want them just to plagiarize. And I didn't put anything in these, but I could go back in and I could edit. All right, so you just click where it says click, and it's going to let you edit. And the maximum mark for original thought was 50 points. Notice right now that my marking guide does not add up to 100 points. It adds up to 75 points. Okay? Moodle will allow you to create a marking guide that adds up to however many points you want it to add up to. But when you are done, it's going to convert that to whatever the maximum possible points are that were established when you set up the assignment. Okay? So if I go into my settings for my assignment, and I go into, I control the grade area for my assignment, and I have it set to 100, okay? Even though I'm grading with a marking guide, if my marking guide has 75 points in it, what Moodle will do is it will say if they got 75 out of 75, it's going to convert it to 100. They would get 100 points in the gradebook. If they got 37.5 out of 75, Moodle would convert that to a 50. And I think I did the math on that, but don't hold me to it. I was an English teacher. Okay? So just know whatever you set here, and you could set this to 200. And if they get 75 out of 75, Moodle will convert that to 200 points. So whatever your maximum point value is, Moodle will scale whatever your marking grade is to reach that point. It'll convert it, basically. Okay? But it does all the math for you, which is great for, again, English teachers like me who spent way too much time reading books and not enough time playing with numbers. Okay? All right, so let me go back and we'll look at our marking guide one more time. Okay, so that's how you establish all of your criteria. Now you can just continue to add as many as you need, and you fill them all out. Oh, I apologize. Give me one moment. I am so sorry.
Shelley has a big dog. Someone must have come up to the front porch. Again, as Shelley had mentioned, we will be answering questions. So if you have any questions, just put them into the questions, and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar.
I very much apologize for that. I have a rather large dog who is usually very, very quiet, and that was with a door closed between us. So sorry for that. Okay, I think that, he's going to stop in just a moment, I know. I think we have some city workers out in the street. I apologize for that. Okay, so this part at the bottom, after you get all your criterion on, the part at the bottom is what I was talking about those frequently used comments. I'm laughing because people are posting in the questions and y'all can't all see it about how it sounds like their house and dogs will be dogs, and yeah, very sorry. Okay, so the frequently used comments, it will give you an option down here. You just click and you can add whatever you want to put in there. So anything that you have to frequently, repeatedly put on your students' assignments, you just type them in. And okay, you type them in, and you can add as many of those as you like as well. Then you're going to have some options at the bottom as to whether or not you want to have your students be able to see all of this, or like if you want them to be able to see the definitions and the guide possible marks per criterion, or if you only want them to see their final grade. Okay, so you could show them the marking guide, and then you could not show them what they made on each section and just show them their final grade. Or you could allow them to see how they did in each area. It's kind of how much information you want to share with those students. Okay. And Myra did ask a good question real quickly. Said, if you've already created an assignment and you haven't graded them, can you go in and change it? Yes, you can. And you can even change it after you've graded them. So if you've already graded some of them and you decide, you know, I really think I want to use a rubric for this, you can go in and do that, and then you can regrade the ones that you had already graded if you like. You don't have to regrade them. Moodle will still keep the grade, but you can go back in and regrade them if you want. So that's one of the nice things that I like about it. And you can change from a rubric to a marking guide, and I'm even going to show you in a minute. You can even edit them. If you've already used them to grade, and maybe you're on the third or fourth assignment and you realize, you know, people keep messing this up and I really need to kind of put that in the marking guide so that I can penalize them or reward them if they did it right, depending on what perspective you want to use. But if you realize there's something you need to add in there, or maybe when we get to the rubric, if you had an all or nothing, like they either did it or they didn't, and then you get 3 or 4 assignments in and you're like, well, this one kind of did it, but I don't have that option. You could go in and add another level of achievement for a criterion, and so you can edit them. And when you edit them and you go to save the changes, Moodle will tell you, you've already graded some assignments using this. Would you like to mark them for regrading? And if you tell it yes, then it will flag those assignments in your list of submissions so that you know you need to go back in and reevaluate them. If you tell it no, it'll just take the grade that they have, and it won't. You could still go back in if you wanted to and edit it, but it won't flag them for you to go back in and change. So it's really good about that. I like that a lot. Oh, and I love somebody just said that this has just simplified their life. And Joe James says she uses, now see, now you're going to be in trouble, Joe, uses marking guides extensively and loves them. So if anybody has questions about them after this, I say call Joe. And she says, I'm guessing it's a she because it's a Joe without an E. I may be wrong, so sorry. That there is a max number of characters for the criterion name. Yes, there is. So when you're out of space, I mean, it's usually, but the name is usually something pretty short. So if you need something longer than the name, do it in a description. Don't put it in the name, like shorten the name, and your description could be longer. And they said, she also says, would make one suggestion when you're creating marking guides that are lengthy. She would recommend saving often while creating, and that's one of those things we all need to be reminded about because that happens very frequently. And this is not one of those things that uses the Addo text editor, so it's not going to autosave. Right? Moodle's gotten better about a lot of those things, but not in the marking guide. So definitely, if it's going to be long, go down to the bottom and keep saving as a draft, and it'll keep you in the screen, and you can finish everything that you said. Okay, so we've got our marking guide set up. So let's look at what that looks like when you actually go grade. I'm going to go in here, and here is my marking guide assignment. I'm going to go in just like I would any regular assignment. I'm going to click the View and Grade All Submissions. Okay. Now, when I go into Edit, here's one that's got something turned in. I'm going to go Grade, and this is what it will look like on my screen as a teacher. So here I can type feedback that's tied directly to this specific criterion, and here I can enter, again, whatever point value I feel they have earned. And then I could, if I want, give an explanation here. If I want to use my frequently used comments, I just have to click in one of the feedback areas where I want it to go, and then I just click on it and it types it out for me. Okay? I still have the option to give general feedback, overall feedback, just like I would on any other assignment. And then I can come down and just save my changes, and it will give all that information back to the student. Oops, I didn't write, and it's even telling me you didn't provide a valid grade. Okay, so 30 out of 50, 15. Now here's what's cool. So now when I go in, it's going to show her grade, 60 out of 100, right? Even though my marking guide only went up to 75. They got 45 out of 75, and that converted it to 60 out of 100 for me. So it's giving them the points out of the maximum points, and it would show up as the 60 in the grade book for them. But when Molly goes in to look at her assignment, she would be able to view all of this feedback that's given to her because it's graded with a marking guide. And yes, Myra is asking, can you make one marking guide and use it for all of your assignments? Yes, you can. So what you end up doing is couple of ways. If I go into, let me see, let's go into a different assignment mod. That's an old one. Hold on. I don't think that'll let me make a change. Let's go into our rubric one. Where are you? There you are. Okay, so I'm going to go into my rubric one. I haven't done anything on this one yet. I'm going to go into the advanced grading for a different assignment, and I'm going to change it to marking guide. And it's going to pull up, I only have one marking guide that I've created so far, so it's going to pull up. But if let's see if I create a new one, if it will show you the actual screen. It's going to let you look for what you have already made within your course. It's going to be the quickest assignment setup. Don't have to do a description, don't have to do that, don't have to do that, don't have to do that, don't have to do that. Now, if I go to grade, and under grading method, I change it when I'm setting it up, it should automatically then take me, where's my test? When I go in, then I go into advanced grading. Okay, so this is what it, I hit the wrong button. Back to the screen again. This is the screen that you would normally get if it's brand new. So I can either create a new one, or if I go back, I can create one from a template. And I pull it up. If it says no template found, you check this box and just say search, and it'll pull up everything that you've made. And you just tell it which one you want to use. Now, it makes that as a template. You say continue, it puts it in here. You can then edit it for this assignment if you need to make a couple of changes for this assignment, and it's not going to change it in any of the other assignments. So that's the nice thing about a template. It's truly a template, and you're not editing the template. You choose to use the template, but then you can edit it, and you're not making changes to the template. Okay? So yes, you could create one. You could use it for all your assignments, but you would have to select it for each assignment. But then you could also modify it if you needed to tweak it just a little bit between assignments. Okay? Okay, so now let's look at rubrics because they're very similar, but they give you a few more options. So I'm going to go into this rubric assignment. Again, basic assignment. I'm going to go into the administration block to advanced grading, and I'm going to choose rubric. Now, again, I've already created a rubric to save us some time. But we're going to go in and we're going to edit it so you would see what it would look like to create. Okay, so again, you have to give it a name. If you're planning on making this a template for yourself or for other people, you might want to put a description in. And then you get down to the actual rubric section, and typically it will start off, it will look like this. You won't have anything there. It'll have criterion. It won't have point values put in there. It's copying what I had earlier. So the point values would all be set to 0. Oops. Okay? And you click to add your criterion. So, okay. If I like you, you get a better grade. No. And then you would click to give a description of the level of achievement for that criterion. Okay? So, here are some examples that we already had, and these are not really specific. You can get as specific as you want, and there is a limit, but you can type quite a bit of information in here. So, I mean, you can put 2 to 3 sentences in these if you really want. So you put a description of how well they achieved, and then you assign a point value to it. Now, here's the cool thing I like about the rubrics in Moodle. This makes it so easy to do. You can add levels if you need. They do not all have to have the same number of levels of achievement. So, for example, these two, it's all or nothing, right? But these, there is some subtlety, I want to say. There's just a few more different ways people might have achieved, or maybe they hit a certain level, but it's not an all or nothing. So there are degrees in there. There's more subtlety in the grading distinctions. So you can make as many as you need, and you can assign different point values. So this one's worth 10 or 0. This one's worth 20 or 10. right? Okay, they don't have to be the same. And just because this is 50-25 doesn't mean I have to go 50-25 0. I mean, I could make this one worth 6. I could skip a lot. So you really have total freedom as to how you assign points for all of these things. Okay? And you can add all the criteria that you need. So you get those all in place. Then you come down and you have a lot of options for how this is going to be displayed. So I like to do mine with a descending number of points. So I get the highest point value first because you want to start off positive, and then they go from positive to negative. You can switch it if you're one of those that wants people to feel like they are earning points as they go to the right, and you start off with the lowest achievement and move over to the highest. So you can decide which order you want them to appear in. That's fine. And then you can decide whether or not you want to see the description while you're evaluating. I don't ever necessarily need that, so I normally turn that off. Whether you want the description to show to the people, like your students, I don't necessarily need the description. They're talking about the description for the rubric as a whole. I don't necessarily need that to show. Normally, I show the points for each level, but during evaluation, some people turn that off so that they feel they're being more objective. Some people don't want the students to know that if you hit this level, that was really only worth 12 points. They just want them to see how they did, not focus so much on individual points, and then they just get the overall grade. So you could turn that off if you wanted as well. Okay? So, and then if you want the grader to be able to add text remarks, that's that feedback for each criterion, you can leave that on as well. And then do you want those remarks to be shown to the people who are being graded? This is great if you have TAs, but make sure they're very careful about this because they may be wanting to put marks for each criterion so that you as the instructor can see what they were thinking when they were grading that, but they may not want the student to see that. So be very careful about that one. So you get to decide all of that. So I'm going to hit save, and we're going to go in and look at what this looks like. Now, I don't think I actually scrolled far enough, but for the rubric and the marking guide both, if you decide to have them shown to the student, then they end up showing up beneath all the instructions for the assignment above the submit button. See, there's their add submission button. So it actually tells them ahead of time your assignment, and I like that quite a bit, right? Clear expectations for them. Then when you go into grade, I'm going to go into this one. You go into your grading screen, and it's going to display your rubric. You can see, you basically click the square, and Moodle's going to calculate the grade. It's going to go back to that grade setting when you set up the assignment. So if I said it was out of 100 possible points, but this only adds up to 80 points, it's going to scale it again for me. So it'll convert it, right? Turn into a percentage out of that maximum points. If I want to put feedback for each criterion, I can type it here. Okay. And so on and so forth. It doesn't have the little quick feedback stuff that you see, common feedback, on the marking guide. But to me, I think the rubric to me seems to be the most objective form of grading because you're really having to zero in, and as an instructor, you can turn the points value off, so you're not even looking at the points. Right? And it's really breaking it down, and you can break it down and get as granular as you like. Still have the option to leave feedback, and then you save your changes, and it's going to then post the grade just like it's a typical grade. So you can see she got an 85, and depending on how your gradebook's set up, it's 85.71. And that's what would show up in the gradebook. But when she goes back into that assignment, she would actually see the rubric and all of the feedback that comes from that rubric. And I will tell you the rubrics work really well on touch devices. If you have like a face-to-face class, you know, I've seen teachers that are teaching public speaking that use a rubric. They set up the assignment in Moodle even though nobody's submitting anything to Moodle. They set up the assignment in Moodle, they create a rubric in Moodle, then they sit at the back of the room while the person's doing their presentation and they tap on the rubric on an iPad or something while the person is speaking. And when the person's done, they just click the save and the grade is there as soon as they sit down. So really nice. I think it speeds things up quite a bit. So, and you do have the ability, again, to go in and use a rubric that you've used in another assignment, or If you're a site administrator, you have the ability to click the button that says publish this as a template. And once the thing is published as a template, then any person on the site would be able to go and select that when they went in and added a rubric or a marking guide. You can do it for marking guide too, to their assignment. Okay, so we already looked at all of that. And again, what I was saying, if you update a rubric or a marking guide after they've been graded, it will mark them for regrading. So I was actually going to show you kind of what that looks like. So I'm in here. Oh, I was actually in there. So I've already graded one, right? I need to go into advanced grading back where I was. I'm going to edit the form. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say, you know, there really is a level I need to add in here. Forgot what payment. Okay. I'm going to save it. And here it is. It says you're about to save changes to a rubric that's already been used. If existing grades need to be reviewed, you can mark them for regrade or you cannot mark them for regrade. I'm going to say mark them for regrade so you can see what that looks like. Okay. Go back into my assignment. Oh, up here. Can just click up here. Go back into my submissions. Interesting. Normally, I don't know why it's not doing that. Usually it would flag her and she would be pink because it needed to be regraded. So I don't know what I did that didn't make it do that. Oh, it flagged it in here. Weird. It used to do it in the screen, and it may be something with our theme that we have set up on the site, but it tells you the rubric has changed. Student cannot see the rubric until you check the rubric and update the grade. So they wouldn't be able to even see the feedback from the old version until you come in, you make your adjustment, or if you don't need to change it, you just wanted to double check, you can leave it the way it was and you just hit Save Changes, and then that will go away. Okay? Okay, so we have a few minutes for questions. I want to make sure I have time to answer all of those. So I'm going to kind of scroll through these, and someone says, can I recommend literature that gives a detail on how to develop a rubric from the pedagogical standpoint? So how do you determine the criteria and author a rubric for student success? There used to be, I'm trying to think of the name of that now, there used to be an online rubric generator, I think it was Rubistar, and they actually had some guides to help you create rubrics. Rubistar is the one that I knew of. But honestly, I would look for stuff for your specific subject area if you could. So you could Google. There aren't any that other than Rubistar that I knew right off the top of my head, but that would be a good discussion to have amongst yourselves since you probably have people that are in the same department. How does the rubric assign points? In the past, it hasn't made sense to you. Well, you decide how many points each criterion is worth and how many points each level of achievement for that criterion is worth. So the teacher has to decide that. And then once that's decided, Moodle takes the total maximum possible points anyone could achieve on that rubric. If they got the highest number of points for each criterion, it takes that maximum number. And then whatever a student gets, it basically converts it to a percentage. It divides it by that number. So if the maximum possible points ended up being 82 points and a student got 41 points out of the 82, then rubric would say, well, Moodle would say you got 50%. So then it would go look at the maximum grade possible for the assignment, and it would say the maximum grade possible for this assignment is 100. They only got 50%, so you get 50% of the maximum possible, which is 100, so they get a 50. Okay, does that make sense? That's how it does it. Do you have to have a 0 level? No, you do not have to have a 0 level for each one. You can make it whatever you want to do. It's not that the calculation it shouldn't be that the calculation is off, because Moodle should just take the number of points that they earned and it should just divide it by the maximum number of points possible in that rubric as a whole. So it shouldn't, that's all it's doing. It's doing basic math. Somebody was asking grading options for the wiki work. The wiki is not a graded assignment. It's not a graded activity in Moodle. So if you want to issue a grade for a wiki, you would really have to go into your gradebook and create what is called a manual grade item. That means it is a grade item that you actually add in the gradebook itself. You do that in your categories and item screen. And you cannot assign a rubric there, so you would have to just do an objective grade. Now, you could, one other option would be to create a separate assignment. So they do the work in the wiki, but then you have a separate assignment that says, like it's called like wiki grade. And you set that assignment to not allow any submissions. So it's what we would call an offline assignment. And then you can use a rubric or a marking guide. You would go look at the wiki in one screen and use the rubric to give them feedback and grade their work in the wiki in the other screen. And then it would go straight into your gradebook and it would be listed as an assignment called wiki grade. That's kind of the way we get around a lot of those things. If you want to use rubrics or marking guides to grade things that are not typically an assignment, you create an assignment that does not allow submissions and you create the rubric or marking guide there, and so you grade it separately. You don't grade it in the activity itself in Moodle. I think I already answered the question about can they see the rubric before they do the assignment. That is one of the options when you set up the rubric, whether or not you want the students to be able to see it. If I can get into the assignment. And if you check the box that you want them to be able to see it, then it does show up at the bottom of the screen underneath your assignment instructions, but above the button that they hit to add their submission. Okay. Question, Heather's asking, are the marking guide and rubric ADA compliant? It is accessible through the keyboard. You can tab through it, so I would assume that it was, but I have not tested it, so I cannot tell you 100%. That is something I will have to research, and we will try and email that answer out to you, a definitive answer. But since you can tab through it, I kind of would think it was, but I don't know how it would do that because it would have to tell like the student which one had been selected. So I'll have to look into that. Don't quote me on that. Oh, and somebody did share a site. Here, let me share this with everyone. Shared a site that has, this is from Myra. Thank you for sharing, Myra, to everyone. Oh, we're a couple minutes over, so if y'all need to jump out, I understand that. I have a couple of extra minutes I can spend for you. Okay. One is for creating rubrics. So the person who asked about rubrics earlier, Myra is sharing that with you, Myra Doyle. And someone said, okay, David is saying, I think you do need a zero field for a rubric. I've had to redo ones that didn't have a zero field because they weren't calculating properly. Okay, I will investigate that. I've never seen that. Do that because typically it should just take the lowest grade, but I will double check. If you do, then you could always just have one just in case to be safe. If I find that you don't, I will let y'all know why it might be calculating differently. And it may have something also to do with, you know, if your maximum point value doesn't add up to the points available, I don't know if that could be creating an issue or not. But I'll look. I have done them without zeros and hadn't noticed, but I may not have been looking closely enough. Melissa was asking, does mixing scales and point grade assignments have any adverse effect on course totals? Good question. The one thing you have to be careful with scales, and this is so strange, is if you're using the natural weighting method, the official documentation tells you that it will ignore scales, that it won't factor them into a grade. But if you are modifying your natural weighting method, it will start to use scales in the grade. And then I have had people who have told me they are using the natural weighting method and it is not ignoring the scales, that the scales are actually being converted to a percentage and they're showing up. But because the natural weighting method is not supposed to convert a score to a percentage, if you use all the default settings for natural weighting, they are supposed to ignore scales because it's not going to convert it. It's just going to sit there as a scale. It wouldn't convert it, right? But if you go and you re-weight, like you custom weight using the natural weighting method, because you can do that, then it does convert things to percentages and the scales start counting in. So if you're using natural weighting, test it out, would be the thing I tell you. Any other aggregation method, you will not have any problem using scale and points grades the same, because it's going to convert the scale to a percentage grade. So your gradebook doesn't care, I guess is what I'm saying. Yeah, Joe had advice on the rubric. They put a 0 field for students who do not submit. You know, we used to do that. We used to have straight zeros so that we could do that. If someone didn't submit a grade, you would go into the rubric and you would put straight zeros down there. But now that you can mass edit in the gradebook and have it automatically fill the zeros, we have not been doing that. But that, yes, that used to be pretty common practice. Okay, and David has a thing on rubrics for 2.9 that's talking about 0 fields, so those of you that were having questions, and I'll take a minute to look at that a little later and we'll clarify. You might want to take a look at that too. And Joe was saying about the ADA question that they get warnings with WAVE on marking guides, but it is accessible via tabbing. Now, Joe, and I hope you're still out there, can you tell me, are you talking it's accessible with tabbing for the students or it's accessible with tabbing for the teachers? Because I know that the teachers could use them with the keyboard, but what I'm wondering about is the screen reader. Does the screen reader pick up on, oh, I guess you're talking marking guides too, not rubrics. So she says it's both. Because a marking guide is going to tell them what it says. It's just going to read it. I'm curious on a rubric if the screen reader tells them whether or not, like what level of achievement has been selected, which box was highlighted for them. I'm not sure how it does that, if it says active or something like that. So I would have to test that out, and I apologize, I didn't think about doing that ahead of time. Okay. All right, I think we're hitting the end of the questions, so I'll stick around for a couple more minutes if you have any more. Happy to answer them. You can email us. We'll take a look at that 0 question for the rubrics, and I'll make sure that we send it to everybody who attended today that covers that, just to make sure that that's clarified. I was asked, do I know a comprehensive list of assignments and activities that are not ADA compliant? I'm not sure. We had a small list in there of elements that we knew were not ADA compliant. The only issue with that, and I do not know where one is on Moodle's website itself, but the issue with that is that when they change versions, they've been doing a lot of updating to try and make Moodle more compliant. The biggest things that I know of that you have to avoid are any of the question styles or rain elements that require dragging and dropping. Those are typically not going to be ADA compliant. But most of the stuff with the drop-down menus are ADA compliant. Those are the biggest ones that I know of. I don't know of a specific module itself that is not ADA compliant, but I know that, for example, in a book module, you can add drag and drop type of elements, or in a lesson module or in a quiz module, and then that specific page may not then be ADA compliant. So it's not the modules themselves as much as the content that you enter into them. Okay. Like I said, I'll stick around for any other questions, but for the rest of you, have a wonderful day. Thanks for coming. Sorry we went over a couple of minutes. Questions? Good questions? Y'all have a good afternoon. Okay, I don't see any more questions, so we're going to go ahead and close out the webinar room. Hope to see y'all next month. Y'all have a good day.